Hello, Mr. Harari.
Hello.
It's great to have you back.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back in Croatia. You are here after more than 10 years, right? A lot has happened since you were last here. You became one of the most prominent global phenomenon. You became famous, and Croatia, our small country, has become a football giant, something. So, and that's on the bright side. On the grim side, things got a bit messy in the world, right? So things changed a lot, and the world we knew it back then, when you were first here, are not here, so it seems. So my question, and I'm going to start this conversation with a question that you yourself so very often ask. So if we humans are so intelligent, why are we so stupid?
Yeah, that's a very good and very deep question, actually. And I'll give two answers. First of all, if you give highly intelligent people bad information, they will make stupid decisions. And we now have the most sophisticated information technology in history, which is flooding the world with junk information. Information is not truth. Just a very small subset of the information in the world is truth. And we are now flooded by enormous amounts of bad information, which leads us to make bad decisions. On a deeper level, especially in a world which is now obsessed with intelligence and with the race to create superintelligence, which we'll discuss later on, it's very important to understand intelligence is not wisdom. What we know from history is the most intelligent entities on the planet are also the most delusional entities on the planet. We humans are by far more intelligent than chimpanzees or elephants or dogs, and we believe in delusions that no chimpanzee or dog will ever believe. Like, I come from a region of the world where people are killing each other by their thousands, believing, for example, that if you kill people from the other tribe after you die, you will go to heaven and receive infinite joy forever and ever. No chimpanzee will ever believe such a thing. But humans, many powerful humans, many intelligent humans believe that. And as we are now creating superintelligence, we should take into account they could be super delusional.
So you say that basically this junk may contribute to constitution of something that you call New World Disorder. And at some point you mention, if this happens, everybody will suffer. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's very simple. When you destroy an order and you don't have anything to replace it with, what you get is chaos. What you get is disorder in which almost everybody suffers. And in the last 10 years, we have seen the deliberate destruction of the world order. The world order of the early 21st century was far from perfect. And again, I come from the Middle East, so I know perfectly well. There was violence, there was injustice, there was many problems, but it was still better than almost any order humanity has ever managed to create. And maybe the best piece of evidence for that is, I would say, government budgets. Not poetry, not philosophy, but budgets. If you want to look at reality, you look at budgets. It's the first time in human history that governments all over the world spent more on healthcare than on security, than on the military. If you go for thousands of years of history, everywhere, Europe, China, America, you will see that almost every king and sultan and even republic, like the Roman Republic or the Venetian Republic, more than 50% of their budget went to pay soldiers and buy ships of war and build fortresses. In the early 21st century, the average expenditure on the military all over the world, taking into account Iran and Israel and North Korea and the US, everything, was down to about 6 to 7%, whereas the expenditure on healthcare was 10.5%. First time in human history that countries felt so safe that the idea that the neighbors might invade and conquer us just became almost unthinkable. So even small and weak countries felt safe enough to spend more time on nurses and doctors and clinics than on soldiers and missiles and warships. And this is now collapsing. The biggest taboo of the world order of 10 years ago was that you cannot just invade and conquer another country because you are stronger. This is now broken in more and more places. Certainly broken with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, certainly broken with Israel's intent still to conquer and annex maybe part of Gaza, of the West Bank. Certainly broken when you hear the leader of the United States openly talking about annexing Greenland, let's say, to the US. We are entering a new imperial era. You know, Croatia was gained independence at the moment of the collapse of the last imperial order, the collapse of the last big empire, the Soviet Empire, which had ripple effects all over Eastern Europe and the world. Now the world is entering a new imperial order. When you hear somebody like President Trump, for instance, talking about peace, his understanding of the word peace is simply that the weak will do what the strong tell them to do. Then you have peace, which is the imperial idea of peace. The Romans also wanted peace, Pax Romana. Imperial peace means if the weak do what the strong tell them to do, then there is peace. Why is the war? Because the weak refuse to acknowledge power. So if the US demands, say, Greenland, and Denmark refuses to give Greenland, and the US invades and conquers Greenland, who is to blame for the violence? Denmark, for refusing to acknowledge the reality of power. This is the new either world disorder or new imperial era that we are entering, which is supercharged again by AI, because AI promises to give whoever controls this new technology the means to control the entire world. The same way that in the 19th century, the few countries who led the Industrial Revolution, like Britain and France and the United States and Japan, they then conquered and dominated the whole world. Nobody could really resist them. This is likely to happen again with AI in the 21st century.
Okay, so you mentioned Donald Trump. So I have a question, and other strongmen. Why do people support them? So is there something that liberal democracy failed in, that people are today, as you say, more inclined to support strongmen? I'll give you just a few numbers. For the first time in over 20 years, according to the Swedish Sweden Institute, we have more autocracies than democracies. So liberal democracy has become the least common regime type in the world. According to the Institute, nearly 3 out of 4 people today live in autocracies. So what did liberal democracy do wrong? How did it fail people?
It did not necessarily fail people, but liberal democracy has certain preconditions. Democracy, in essence, is a conversation. Dictatorship is dictate. One person dictates everything. Everybody has to listen and do. There is no conversation. The idea of democracy is let's gather everybody together and have a conversation and everybody can talk, voice their opinions, their interests, and let's try to work something together. It's a conversation. Now, it's not easy to hold a conversation. For most of history, large-scale democracy was absolutely impossible. The only examples we have of democracies in the pre-modern era are small-scale city-states like Athens or Republican Rome, or even smaller tribes. That in the Stone Age, democracy was very common. Most tribes and bands were democratic, not authoritarian. But as societies grew bigger, it became difficult to maintain the conversation. If you live in a single city with, say, 50,000 people, you can still have a conversation. But if you have a country with millions of people, spread over thousands of kilometers, how do you have a conversation? In the ancient world, it was simply impossible, so we do not have a single example of a large country, kingdom, empire that functioned democratically. Both Athens and Rome, when they grew, they stopped being democratic. Large-scale democracy became possible for the first time in history because of new information and communication technologies that appeared in the modern era. First print, and later telegraph and radio and television, that they for the first time made it possible to have a real-time conversation between millions of people spread over thousands of kilometers. So democracy is built on top of information technology. It's not that you have democracy as a kind of ideological system or ethical system, and on the side you have technology. No, democracy is built on top of technology, of information technology. And if you have a big change in information technology, you have an earthquake in democracy. Now, what has happened over the last 10 years is not that democracies stopped providing the goods. There are many problems, but there are always problems in history. Show me one period in history or one regime in history that didn't have problems, economic problems, social problems. According to most objective measurements, like again, healthcare, education, the death of women in childbirth, how many women die during childbirth? The level of healthcare provided by democracies in the early 21st century is still better than in any previous time in history. What has changed is the information technology that the entire structure is built on. And over the last 10 years, we saw this really striking, even paradoxical situation when we have developed the most sophisticated information technology in human history, and the conversation has collapsed. People have lost the ability to talk with each other, or at least to listen to each other. They still know how to talk, but it's becoming more and more difficult to listen. You know, the only thing I think that, I don't know, like Democrats and Republicans in the US can agree on is that the conversation has collapsed. They can no longer agree on the most basic facts. They cannot no longer have a conversation. This is not because of extreme ideological gaps. Actually, the ideological gap between conservatives and liberals, between Republicans and Democrats in the US today is smaller than in many previous eras. Like you think about the 1960s, with the civil rights movements, with so many assassinations, so much violence in the street, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, the sexual revolution. And yet, Americans could at least agree about who won the elections. Now, the ideological gaps, if you look at the actual ideology, there is actually, in some areas like abortion, the gap is bigger, but in most areas, the gap is smaller. What is becoming bigger is the deficit of trust and the difficulty of conversing, and again, agreeing on the most basic facts. And there are different reasons for why this is happening, but I would say that the underlying reason is the technological revolution in information technology. Now, humans have spent thousands of years building trust between us. And we're amazing in our ability to build trust. 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of a few dozen individuals and couldn't trust anybody outside their band, which meant there were no trade networks, there were no large political structures like tribes, there were no cultural movements beyond the small band. You couldn't trust anyone. Today, you have nations of hundreds of millions of people that trust each other. You have trade networks of billions of people. We are very good at it. But we have built over thousands of years trust by interacting human to human. Now, something is inserting itself into almost every human relationship as a mediator and perhaps as a wall. And this is the new technologies, the algorithms, the AIs. In the midst of almost every relationship today on Earth, there is an algorithm. So it's no longer human to human, it's human to algorithm to human. And something is happening there because I'll say just this and then we'll develop it in other directions, but what we see is a shift in trust from humans to algorithms. Trust in humans and human institutions is collapsing. Trust in human governments, banks, media organizations, universities is collapsing. At the same time, trust in algorithms is going up. People say, I don't trust any of these journalists or editors, but the same persons trust the algorithms that feed them the news on social media. People say, I don't trust the banks. At the same time, you see a rise in trust in cryptocurrencies, which are algorithm money. You don't trust the humans to produce money, but you trust the algorithms to produce money. So trust, it's not that trust is evaporating from the world. Trust is shifting from human institutions to algorithms and AIs. This causes human organizations like democracies to enter a crisis, even collapse. And we don't know what will emerge instead. We will not go back to the dictatorships of the 20th century. A new kind of political system, of political regime is emerging without any humans at the center. It's non-human intelligence, which is increasingly taking over the political and economic and social system.
So before we move to that non-human agent or system, let me ask you now, when you said that trust is evaporating, so what about institutions like European Union, the 20th century institution, which was built also, amongst other things, on trust of member countries, trust of the people who live in these member countries. For instance, in Croatia, trust in the institutions is super low, but trust in European institutions is much higher than trust in national political institutions. However, with this huge democratic backsliding and decline of trust in institutions, do you think European Union can survive?
I can't predict the future because it depends on decisions of people like the people here in the hall, whether it survives or not. I hope it does. It certainly faces a crisis. It's a crisis that's been building because, you know, the European Union was, it was very difficult to develop trust in it. For me, one of the signs was the money. You look at the money of almost every other political entity on the planet, it has humans on it. These famous people from the past, these presidents or poets or scientists that everybody's supposed to admire, it's on the money. You look at the euro, what's on the currency, what's on the banknotes, there are no humans on it. And my understanding is that they couldn't agree who to put there. Because, of course, every nation has its own revered ancestors. I don't know, in Hungary, Attila the Hun is father of the nation. If they put Attila the Hun on a 50-euro note, many people would be upset. For the French, Napoleon, okay, so you put Napoleon in 50-euro note, people will be upset. But they couldn't even put Marie Curie. They couldn't even put Leonardo da Vinci. So they say, we'll put bridges and windows and doors. And this is what's on the euros. You can check it later. There are bridges, windows, doors, which all signify Europe's openness. But they were so afraid of offending the sensitivity of this group or that group, they couldn't even put real bridges on it. So they put on the euros these kind of imaginary bridges in the style of the Romans or in the style of the Gothic or whatever, but not real bridges, because we put a bridge from France, the Germans will be upset. You can't build a strong system like that. If you build a house and it only has windows and doors and no walls, it can't stand. If you can't agree on a single person that people find admirable, it won't work. And we need it to work. Europeans need it to work. I mentioned earlier that we are entering a new imperial era. Europe is now like Africa in the 19th century. This is Zululand. That, the Zulus have heard that somewhere across the ocean in Britain, they invented steam engines and there are trains or something like that. This has nothing to do with us. We have much more urgent problems here. Fast forward a few decades, it's a British colony. You can try to regulate AI like the Zulus would try to regulate the Industrial Revolution. It doesn't work if it doesn't happen here. And Europe, at the present, in the AI race, you really have two competitors. It's the US and China. Mm-hmm. But Europe has a real chance and still have a little bit of time.
And Eurosong. We have Eurosong.
The Eurovision, yes. We'll get to that in a minute. But Europe has the economic resources. It has the human capital. Many of the people who develop AI in the US are actually Europeans. Europe has the science, the educational system to be a third independent player in this race, but only if it sticks together. If Europe falls apart, its best hope is to become an American vassal. And this is one of the reasons that you see the American administration so supportive of anti-Euro European parties. Because they know if they break up the European Union, done deal, they are in our pocket. And the strange thing about many of these anti-Euro European parties, they present themselves as great patriots. They talk about, we want our independence, we want our sovereignty, not realizing that the greatest threat is not from the Brussels bureaucrats, and not even from the immigrants coming in boats across the Mediterranean. It's the AI immigrants that are the biggest threat to the independence and sovereignty and culture of European nations. Like if you ask people, what are you concerned about immigration? And immigration now is the #1 issue in many, many European countries. And people will say, we worry that immigrants will take our jobs. We are worried that immigrants come with different cultural ideas and they will change our culture. We are worried that the immigrants are politically loyal to foreign entities and not to this country. They will take over. And all these concerns, I don't belittle them. They are legitimate concerns. But I would say, if this is what worries you, you should be far more worried about the AI immigrants, which are coming without visas, at the speed of light, and taking over everything. They will take the jobs. They will change the culture dramatically. And they are not loyal to any political entity in Europe. Their political loyalty is across the ocean. So yes, worry about the independence and sovereignty of European countries, but if you really want to preserve it, the only chance is to stick together.
Great message, thank you. So you mentioned now it's overseas. We should worry about the overseas. And a couple of days ago, we had this outage of Amazon. And so many things collapsed. So we realized in a split of a second how dependent we are on only a few people. So techno bros, techno oligarchs, Bezos, Elon Musk, and the others. So, but can we say no? Do we have option any longer?
Yeah, I mean, again, not immediately. At the present situation, yes, Europe relies on technology, on infrastructure from outside. But it is not helpless. Economically, culturally, scientifically, it's still a superpower if it gets its act together and decides to do something about it. But so far, it's not doing it. Again, when I say that AI immigrants are coming over, it's not just the technical infrastructure like we saw with the Amazon outing. We talked earlier about democracy is built on top of information technology. And this is why in democracy the media is so important. And if you look at democracies in the 20th century, and not just democracies, also autocracies, some of the most important jobs in the country were news editors, media editors. You look, I don't know, at Italy, in the fascist Italy, Mussolini, before he became dictator of Italy, he started his career as a journalist, then he became editor of a newspaper, then he became dictator. This was his ladder of promotion, journalist, editor, newspaper.
Message to journalists,
dictator.
hope not.
Lenin, before he was dictator of the Soviet Union, the one job Lenin held in his life was editor of a newspaper. They were very important people.
Journalists in the room are wiggling.
And they were important because they controlled the public conversation. Not necessarily telling people what to think, but telling people what to think about. What will be the main topic of conversation of everything that happened yesterday in the world? What will be at the top of the newspaper, which will be the main topic of conversation? If you ask who are the most important editors today in Europe, what are their names? They don't have names because they are not human beings and they are not in Europe. They are algorithms. They are the algorithms that manage the big social media platforms. They are now the most important editors in Europe. And so, again, when I say that the AI immigrants will come and take jobs, they will not start with the jobs of janitors and nurses. They start at the top. They
with my job.
With your job, with my job, with the job of editors, with the job of bankers, with the job of lawyers, with the job of authors and writers. I'm now working on a book. My assumption is that this is the last book that I'll probably write, because by the time it's over, it takes a long time to write a book, let's say 5 years. AI will write better books than I can.
Are you afraid that AI is going to steal your job? That ChatGPT or any other OpenAI?
I'm not sure if afraid is the right word. I take it into account. I take it into account that this is my last book. My line of work is language, is words, is stories. And as I observe the development of AI over the last few years, I've been absolutely amazed at how good it became with language. It has a really deep understanding of language. As an author, like I write a sentence, I sometimes think for 2 or 3 minutes which word to use. I have like 2 words, quite close in meaning, and I have to choose one. And I try to understand what is the semantic field of this word, which other words and other terms it has connotations with. And AI has amazing semantic ability to understand the semantic field of a word. It's becoming better than us. Some people tell me, all AI and language, it is just glorified autocomplete. But besides being an author, I'm also a meditator. I meditate 2 hours a day trying to observe the processes of my mind. One of the most interesting things to observe in meditation is how thoughts are formed in the mind. And what happens in my mind is some glorified autocomplete. When I start a sentence, I usually don't know how it will end. As a public speaker, it often terrified me at the beginning because in the middle of giving a talk, I don't even know how this sentence is going to end. Like when I just said, I don't know how this sentence is going to end, I could have said how it's going to continue, how it's going to terminate, how it's going to develop. I didn't know when I started the sentence what will be the word at the end. Where did it come from? I don't know. There is some just autocomplete. And AI is becoming better at these kind of word prediction. We think about ourselves as the most intelligent entity on the planet so far. We can think better than any other animal, and we can, at least in words. But if thinking is words, it's very difficult for us to think, in 1 million words. We usually have short thoughts. AI can think in extremely complex networks of words, which we cannot. I think one of the biggest questions really for humanity, a philosophical but also a political question in 2025, what does it mean to think? Modern philosophy was born, allegedly, when René Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And ever since, people have been arguing, what did he mean when he said, I think? What does it mean to think? And can AI think? There are 2 main versions of what does it mean to think. Some people say to think is to string words together in a certain structure. Like all humans are mortal, Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's what's the conclusion of these words. If this is thinking, AI can think much better than us, or will be able to think in a superhuman way in a very few years. Alternatively, people say, no, thinking is a holistic experience. When you think, you also feel pain, or you also feel love. There is an emotional and even sensory dimension to thinking. If this is thinking, then no, AI cannot think, at least not now. I don't know about the future. And this is becoming now a crucial question, and this goes back to your first questions about intelligence. What do we value in human beings? If it is their ability to string words together and in logical constructs and reach conclusions, then game over. AI will do it better than us.
So it will overpower us then?
Anything that is based on language will be taken over by AI. When I say anything, I don't mean just writing books. I mean the financial system. I mean religion. Finance ultimately is words, is stories. The stock exchange is a place where people tell stories to each other in order to gain their trust and convince you to put your life savings in this story or in that story. Money, we mentioned the euro banknotes. They don't have any objective value. It's ultimately just a story. And Bitcoin, like the euro banknotes, it's also a story. Finance is ultimately also based on language, and it will be taken over by AI. More and more of the trade in the world, even now, is conducted by AI. It is likely that in a few years, AIs will invent new financial devices that we cannot understand to create trust between AIs so they can trade and cooperate in ways...
So speak in its own language.
Yeah, speaking its own language. Like horses and humans. A horse can see that, like in the Middle Ages, like a host can see that I'm giving you a few shiny round things, and in exchange, you give the host to me. The host doesn't understand what's happening here, because the horses cannot understand money. They understand, they see the round coins, they can't understand the story that makes these coins valuable.
So we'll be horses.
We will be the horses, that AIs will hire and fire us and trade based on financial theories and financial concepts that we can't understand. Similarly, if you think about religion, at least, again, goes back to what he's thinking. At least some interpretations of religion base it ultimately on language. In the beginning was the word. Religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they sanctify language, they sanctify text. The ultimate authority in these religions is in a text, not in a human being. Why do rabbis still have authority in Judaism? Why do priests still have authority in Christianity? Because until today, the texts couldn't speak. So you have, say, the Bible, this is the ultimate authority, but you have a question how to interpret a certain passage in the Bible, you ask the Bible, it doesn't answer. So you need an expert that will tell you what the text means, and this is the rabbi or the priest. What happens to this religion when the texts start talking by themselves? Which is AI. More and more people, like I mentioned, I'm meditating. More and more people in my milieu, when they have a question about meditation, and 2 years ago, they would go to a human guru to ask, they now ask the AI. And there is rationale behind it, because again, I take Judaism as an example. Over the centuries, so many Jewish texts have been written, not just the Bible, then the Mishnah, and the Talmud, and this and that. No rabbi is able to read all of that, and certainly not remember all of that. It's too much for the human brain. AI can. AI can read every single text written by every obscure rabbi in Poland or Morocco over the last 2,000 years, remember every word, and find patterns that escaped all human rabbis until today. If religion is ultimately based on language, it will be taken over by AI. Again, if we think about one of the last big revolutions in religion, the Reformation in Europe, how did it happen? It started with the printing press. In medieval Europe, there were very few Bibles, so most people never read the Bible. So to know what was in the Bible, you would go to church and the priest would tell you what is in the Bible. You did not read the Bible yourself. Then came print, and everybody could have a Bible at home, and people started reading the Bible and realizing, hey, this is not what the priest said. The Bible never says anything about a pope. What did they get the idea of a pope from? The Bible never says anything about purgatory. The Bible never says anything about saints and relics and venerating images of the Virgin. Where did they take it from? So the moment when, because of technology, suddenly every Christian could read the Bible for himself or herself and interpret it, you had this big explosion of the Protestant Reformation. The authority of the institution, the church, collapsed, at least in some countries. And people started, it says this, no, it says that. Now, what happens if instead of interpreting the Bible for yourself, the Bible interprets the Bible itself? You can have AI is a master of texts. And for instance, most Christian priests don't know Hebrew and Greek, the original language of the Bible. They rely on translations. AI knows Greek better than any Greek, and it can know biblical Hebrew better than any Jew. So if ultimate authority is text and language, it will be taken over by AI.
But what's the solution then? So a few days ago, a group of people, and that's not the first initiative, this one is interesting because it's such a diverse group of people, from notorious Steve Bannon to Meghan Markle. They petitioned to prevent advanced AI system developments. Are you on the same page with them? Should we ban them? AI development?
We can't.
Is this the solution?
I signed a lot of these petitions in recent years. Maybe I even signed this one. I signed so many I don't remember. I completely sympathize, and I think it's a good sign that somebody like Steve Bannon signs it. And when you look at the US today, I think one of the most promising things is actually the evangelical Christian part of MAGA, that they are becoming very suspicious of the program of the tech bros. And you see an increasing split inside MAGA between the Christians and the technologists. And this is crucial. And at least to some extent, the Christians, because of the humanistic tradition of Christianity, they understand correctly that there is something here which is a very deep threat to humanity. And I disagree with the Christian wing of MAGA about a lot of things. I'm a gay man. But I think that they have a deep appreciation for the value of humans. And this is important in this time and era. Because we have people who do not have this deep appreciation, that they value only intelligence, and they have a very narrow definition of intelligence. And for them, if AI becomes more intelligent than humans, then we don't need humans.
And it's a great point of unity that you just mentioned, humanity. So between different tribes, so to speak. So since we have a few more minutes, and I think that we are going to address lots of AI-related questions and algorithms-related questions in the audience questions, I would like to ask you one question that is very heated also everywhere, also here, and you mentioned your country, you mentioned Gaza.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask you, what's the situation back in Israel, and do you think that peace in Gaza is possible?
The situation is terrible, and peace is possible. to make it very, very short.
Let me jump in. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
The most important thing to understand is that peace is possible. There is no objective obstacle to peace. It's not like, it's a law of nature. The laws of physics force Israelis and Palestinians to slaughter each other. This is not the case. There is actually enough, if you think in objective physical terms, there is enough land between the Mediterranean and Jordan to build houses and schools and hospitals for everybody. There is enough food, there is enough water, there is enough energy. There is no shortage. It's not, people sometimes say, oh, humans fight for the same reason that wolves fight. They fight over food. They don't. There is enough food if it is distributed. People fight not because of what's in the land, but because of what's in the mind. They are simply unable to see the other side. They are unable to recognize the humanity of the other side. Ultimately, again, the human brain has billions and billions of neurons and synapses in it, but the human mind sometimes finds it difficult to hold just two ideas. Sometimes so poor, so narrow, it cannot hold two ideas. Like, to at the same time acknowledge that there are more than 7 million Palestinians living in this land. They don't have anywhere else to go. They're mostly born there, and they have a right to live in dignity, in security, and in prosperity. And at the very same time acknowledge that there are also 7 million Jews living in this land. They also were mostly born there. They have nowhere else to go. They also have a right to live in dignity and security and prosperity. It sounds simple to hold these two ideas together. There is no logical contradiction there. There is no physical contradiction there. But so many people are just unable to do it. They are able to see the rights and the misery of one side, and then they completely deny even the existence of the other side. And when our minds are very narrow, sometimes we try to kind of impose our narrow mind on the reality. My mind cannot contain the other people, so I'll just annihilate the other people from reality, and then there'll be a match between my mind and reality. But the thing is, just expand your mind. If there are two things in reality which you can't contain both, the solution is not to destroy one of them. The solution is to expand your mind. Because the human mind can be vast. We can contain multitude if we make the right effort. And this is, I hope, what will happen. This is not what is happening. I mean, over the last few years, and I'll talk mainly about my side, which I know better, Israel and the Jews, they become so narrow-minded. They become so self-centered. They can only feel their own pain, and they become almost impossible for them. It's like you feel your pain, and if somebody points out to the pain of somebody else, you feel almost affronted that you're taking away attention from my pain. And the inability to sympathize, yes, you're in pain, but there are other people in pain also. You're not the only one in pain. This, it's the most basic human ability for empathy, but not to be so self-centered.
Thank you very much for this thought. So, since we are approaching the end of the first part of our conversation, and of course there's the question of Ukraine left, I would like you to, if possible, so that we squeeze it in, because I think it's super important. Do you see an end to the war in Ukraine?
And I can't predict the future. It depends on the decisions of people all over the world. But I would say that, and this is what I said in the beginning, that the war in Ukraine is of crucial importance, of course, to the whole of Europe and to the whole world. Because this is where the biggest challenge to the old world order is. The old world order was imperfect in many ways. But one thing it managed to do, it managed to create a taboo on the conquest of countries. That no matter how powerful one country is, it cannot, just because it's more powerful, invade and conquer a weaker neighbor. This was the biggest taboo of the international system. This is what enabled countries all over the world to feel secure enough to invest more money in nurses than in soldiers. Because you felt, yeah, maybe I'm weak, but nobody's going to just invade and conquer me. This is something that happened in the Middle Ages. This is something that happened in Hitler's days. It can't happen today. And all the world is watching Ukraine and realizing it can happen. People compare it, say, to the American invasion of Iraq. It's not. I'm not supporting, of course, the American invasion of Iraq. It was a huge mistake and a crime. But one thing to say, America never intended to annex Iraq to the USA. Not a single millimeter of Iraqi ground was annexed to the USA, and the American soldiers are no longer there. In Ukraine, every piece of land conquered by the Russian army is annexed by the Russian state. And even some pieces of land that are not conquered are already annexed. This is imperialism in its old sense. In the late 20th century, when the old style of imperialism, the imperialism of the Roman Empire, of the Attila the Hun, of the Mongols, it disappeared. So people started to use the word imperialism to describe all kinds of other things. I don't know, Coca-Cola sells drinks in the third world, imperialism. They got so engaged with that, they forgot what imperialism originally meant. Imperialism originally meant that you invade another country, conquer it by force of arm, and annex it to your expanding empire. And this is now happening in Ukraine with the Russian invasion. And if this is not stopped, then we will see it all over the world.
Thank you very much.